I watched live action One Piece, so you don't have to. I know I'm fashionably late, but I really wanted to give everyone time to actually watch and enjoy Netflix's One Piece, because despite all odds, it's actually incredible. It's not only a perfect example of an anime to live action done right, but a great example of how any adaptation should be taken into consideration. It's become obvious how movies and showrunners have had a distinct lack of original ideas, so they're just taking any old IV and rehashing the same schmuck, but somehow making it worse. Now, adaptations aren't automatically bad, but that doesn't mean they're guaranteed to be a success. It's a delicate process with immense research and care towards the source material, which is why the creator of One Piece was directly involved with the project. I don't trust Netflix, but I'll happily put my faith in Oda. And after 5 years of planning and pushbacks, One Piece finally aired, which is currently #1 on Netflix in over 85 countries. So what made Netflix's One Piece work? Why was this adaptation different from so many other animes and past abominations? The answer? Numerous changes were made which helped transition the longtime anime into live action, and I'm going to be going over some of the key differences. Obviously, I'll be going into details regarding the plot and how they contributed to the overall story. Also, these aren't in order based on storyline, but more on their impact and the impression left behind. Right away, I want to point out some goofy scenes/errors I noticed while watching, just to address the elephant in the room and clarify it's great, but not perfect. Now, Helmeppo was pretty accurate to the anime in terms of personality, as he's pretty much either a you love him or hate him kind of character. Side note, why does he appear to be wearing Air Jordans? Also, there was like this whole scene where he's just butt-ass naked while playing with Zoro's sword. Terrible phrasing aside, I'm not really sure what fan service they were trying to appeal to, but I guess anything's possible. Even the most badass character in the series isn't safe from embarrassment. Apparently, the Wado Ichimoji is a grower, not a shower. Alright, so transitioning into actual planned decisions, let's talk about some small changes. Now, the first one to come to mind is the setting for story points. Many of the sets, such as the ships or towns, are practical effects rather than CGI. They built locations like the Going Merry and Baratie, which helped glorify many of the fights that occurred. Alongside canon locations, there were a couple of changes to help amplify the intensity of the given situation. For starters, the Orangetown arc takes place inside a circus where the citizens are held hostage, forced to laugh and applaud at every corrupt thing Buggy does. Compare this to the anime, which simply takes place down by the docks, and you'll see how a simple scene change drastically improved the quality of the fight in live action. Not only that, it helped amplify the main villain of this arc being Buggy, and gave the audience an idea of who he was as a character. Another great example is the fight against Kuro during the Syrup Village arc. Rather than being an all-out war on the shore, they chose for it to be a closed fight inside Kaya's mansion, focusing more on horror rather than strength. Once again, this change helped amplify the intensity of the situation and brought out the more sinister side of Kuro. There are many scenes like this throughout the season, and even ones that are accurate to the source go hard without trying to be this overly unrealistic CGI smackdown. This leads us to the next topic, effects. Regarding them, I was definitely more impressed with the practical effects rather than special effects used. There's just something satisfying about a carefully choreographed fight with real explosions as opposed to CGI fire and power-ups. That's not to say they were all bad. In fact, I was heavily impressed with how they handled the Chop Chop fruit. Obviously, I can't talk about effects without mentioning the protagonist Luffy and the use of the Gum Gum fruit. Truthfully, it wasn't that bad. It really feels like they just took the worst takes in the trailers, because when applied in the fast-paced fights, they actually worked better than anticipated. Needless to say, that doesn't mean there weren't any horrible takes. In fact, probably the worst effect for Luffy was how they handled the Gum Gum balloon. I'm sorry, but they really needed to work on that. Moving on to some of the bigger changes, we have adapting the characters. What should be noted is that casting for the main characters was not colorblind at all. They very specifically chose actors who looked the part, which I think was an excellent choice, because these are not colorblind characters. Oda has made it very clear what ethnicity each of them are if One Piece took place in the real world. However, looks aside, that was not the only reason why casting was great. More importantly, it's because every actor did an excellent job playing the part and bringing these characters to life.
My theory is that the One Piece must be a taco. It only makes sense, right?
What?
It's the greatest treasure in the world.
Okay, you cannot tell me that's not perfect casting. They weren't trying to be a blatant copy from the anime either. They made decisions that not only capture the core essence of their characters, but toned them to match something more realistic. The decision to tone down characters like this made them not just more believable, but actually contributed to the overarching story. I've said before that representation cannot replace good storytelling, and while companies like Disney are solely focused on remaking classic films, with the only marketing being representation of characters, that's not guaranteed to make these projects better, but can tarnish the magic of beloved franchises. That said, there's definitely plenty of representation in One Piece, and some notable changes to classic characters, which, in my opinion, actually improved them. I really enjoyed how the Syrup Village arc was handled, and another reason for this is because of the supporting cast throughout it. Kuro isn't the only pirate on the crew who's undercover in Kaya's mansion. He's also joined by the Niabon brothers, Sham and Butchie. However, they're never referred to as the Niabon brothers in the live action, because Sham is female while Butchie remains almost identical. Believe it or not, this decision paid off because the brother-sister dynamic between the two actually left a much larger impression as opposed to the original. Their designs are much more broad and memorable, and all three members of the Black Cat Pirates serve as a parallel dynamic to the Straw Hats up to this point. It was also accommodated by a very well choreographed fight between Zoro and the two, which, if I had to complain a little bit, the only change I'd make is to have Nami fight alongside Zoro to really help fill in the absence of the two slowly becoming friends, which is a plot point I'll talk about later. In the same arc, another character whose portrayal was almost on point was Mary, but there was one key difference that greatly improved his character that was left out in both the anime and manga, and that was being killed off. Anyone familiar with Oda knows his biggest flaw is lack of death in the series. This also showed that Oda isn't babying his characters anymore, and we could very well see more deaths this time around, which could greatly improve other characters down the line. So while some may disagree with these changes to characters, in actuality, the way they were executed is a great representation of what it means to adapt established characters. It doesn't mean they all stick the landing, but if they didn't succeed in the original, then there's nothing wrong with experimenting and seeing if a simple change is enough to make something better. Probably the most notable change overall was the pacing, especially early on. One Piece is known for taking its time to flesh out characters and stories, which is why there's over 1,000 chapters. With season 1 being the majority of the East Blue saga, 8 episodes was not enough to cover 100-something chapters, and it really showed within the first 2 episodes, where characters are really speedrunning through the story. I understand with streaming, early numbers are important, which is why having a season that you can binge within a single sitting is crucial now more than ever. However, I really think what would have helped is if they decided to go for a full 10 episodes and get the most out of the binge culture like initially planned, because while I do enjoy the ending of the first season, it left out some major plot points and shortened key moments in the saga. Which brings us into some of the largest changes made in the live-action One Piece, starting with plot lines. As stated, the first 2 episodes in the live-action were really speedrunning through the story, and the first half was pretty canon to the story, with Luffy saving Colby and defeating Alvida. Towards the middle, however, that's when the differences began, and I want to clarify, it was handled phenomenally. One of the key differences is Zoro's fight against Mr. 7, which is an important moment in the next arc that was never shown in the anime, only mentioned by Zoro. Following that, Luffy, Zoro, and Nami are all introduced in this arc. So right away, it's been the 3 of them since the very first arc, and while it's uncanon to the source, its execution was nice and allowed the 3 of them to semi-establish a connection before the next arc. But that's only the A plot, however, because this episode would also establish a B plot throughout the entire season, involving Colby and Garp chasing the Straw Hats. Now this decision gave a continuous parallel dynamic between Luffy and Colby, as we could see their stories unfold as they both progress amongst their ranks. However, this B-plot often conflicted with the A-plot and contributed to the pacing issue. There would be these fast-paced moments from the Straw Hats that would then transition into slow moments involving Garp and Colby's dynamic. While I enjoyed seeing this story happen in the adaptation, which is something that doesn't happen till much later in both the anime and manga, it created a bit of inconsistency among characters and their respected plot lines. Luffy's flashback was split between Romance Dawn and Orange Town, and we don't even get to see Buggy's, even though it's a crucial part regarding his character and relationship with Shanks. Following that, Zoro's flashback never happened in Shell's Town because there wasn't time. So they had his during Syrup Village, which took away key moments to help build Usopp's character. But what's worse than removing key moments for characters is the removal of characters entirely. While Sham and Butchie were given greater roles by assisting Kuro in the live action, the cost was the removal of a fan favorite, that being Django. However, it wasn't as if he was completely left in the dark, because this is where good writing comes into play, as a simple piece of dialogue not only fixed a missing element, but gave viewers a reason as to why we should fear this villain.
Until the day they don't. I've killed more crewmates than I care to remember. They're expendable.
It's really up to interpretation, but if not even Django is safe from Kuro's wrath, then that's how you know he's serious about getting the job done. Another example is during Orange Town, and while Buggy may have had his first mate, the absence of their mascot Richie would not have gone unnoticed. Once again, it's amazing what good writing can do to fix missing elements and give the viewers a general sense of this character.
And where, oh where, was the dancing lion?
The final absence I want to mention is Don Krieg, and this really segues into the entire Baratie arc. For starters, not only did he make an appearance, but he was actually killed off, which was surprising because that wasn't even a concept in the original. Rather than words, I guess, actions speak louder, and the audience gets to see what happens in the most badass introduction for Mihawk. But this unfortunately means he doesn't get to be the main villain for Baratie, as Mihawk finished the job and doesn't leave anything for Luffy. This doesn't mean the arc was bad by any means, it just means they had to adapt. Though it's definitely the most conflicting arc in terms of overall opinion. Zoro versus Mihawk. Excellent. It's super true to the source, and the live action introduction for Mihawk only heightened the fight. Sanji's introduction. Loved how they modernized his flirtatious personality. I'd go as far as to say that I might have enjoyed it more than the original.
Apologies, madam, I didn't see you there. Would you care for an aperitif to start? We have several rare Mercure vintages in stock, or perhaps you'd like a glass of umeshu. You know, something sweet for someone sweet.
Plus, he's the only character in the main cast to have their flashback done in a single telling rather than being broken up. But now, let's talk about the main issue. There's no key moment or deciding factor as to why Sanji eventually joins Luffy. Part of what makes him join the Straw Hats is watching Luffy put his life on the line for the Baratie while fighting Don Krieg. This never happens in the live action. It was Zeph telling Sanji that he didn't save his life for him to spend it working at the Baratie. Another key moment they left out was having Sanji there during Zoro's fight against Mihawk. In the anime and manga, watching Zoro put his life on the line for his dream, the fact that he would rather die than give up on it in conjunction with Luffy are key moments that help Sanji realize he wants to pursue his dream, and to do that, he'd have to go with the Straw Hats. These are definitely some of the drawbacks with the live action, but speaking of Zoro versus Mihawk, Sanji might not have been there, but Nami was. Now this change was handled better than Sanji's in my opinion, because before the fight, Zoro and Nami have this moment where they get to know each other through drinking, to which Nami tells Zoro about how she could never have friends. It was this moment that convinced her to stay for Zoro's fight rather than leave for Arlong Park, which is another change from the source. This in turn pushed the narrative forward for Arlong to come to the Baratie to get Nami rather than straight up abandoning her friends. Once again, I really like this change because it felt natural rather than forced. I might have even enjoyed it more than the original. However, I do think this decision still lacked a key moment, because while I do believe in the power of alcohol, Zoro and Nami's friendship was still missing something crucial. There's never really a moment before Baratie that's ride or die, where they showed to have each other's backs. That's why I think during Syrup Village, Nami should have fought alongside Zoro against Sham and Butchie, because it not only would have been a great parallel between the duos, but also give Zoro and Nami their key moment to establish their friendship, that they would both unintentionally put their life on the line for their captain, realizing in that moment they are a crew. I've talked about differences between the source and the adaptations, but there's still one arc in the adaptation that's yet to be discussed, and that's Arlong Park. Truthfully, I don't have much to say. Arlong Park remains true to the source, which is both good and bad, because this is considered to be the turning point for viewers, often determining whether or not fans are in it for the long run. While the live action captures this moment wonderfully for new fans, it doesn't really do anything to exceed current fans' expectations. In fact, there's a distinct lack of elements that can really only be obtained from the anime. For example, Hachin is absent in the story. Granted, he may not have contributed much in this arc, but does play a huge role later in the series. His absence, however, was replaced by creating a key moment between Zoro and Sanji, as they compete to see who can defeat more fishmen, establishing their friendship/rivalry, and I really like that. However, the biggest change in the arc was probably the most disappointing to fans of the series, and that was the walk on Arlong Park. Nami's cry for help touched my empty heart, but what followed lacked one of the most powerful scenes from the anime, where the 4 remaining crew members walk up to Arlong's base to the sound of the drums of liberation. I'm sorry, but how are you going to recreate one of the most heartbreaking moments in One Piece and not go all in by following up with one of the most iconic? While I'm confident this was by far the most enjoyed arc to new fans, established ones like myself knew something was missing. Something that would have really signified the relationship between these core characters. As a live action adaptation, it's by far one of the best ever made. However, that doesn't mean it's guaranteed to sit well with the general audience. While One Piece sets the bar high for anime and anime to live action, it might not retain the same level of viewership when being portrayed as just another TV show. Realistically, I don't think it'll be the start of a new era of One Piece, but it can add on to the existing one, because despite all odds, it truly captures the same feeling of what it's like to experience the world of One Piece for the first time. I was always curious why Oda joined the production, when it would be obvious how much they were going to have to change from the source to adapt One Piece into live action. But after watching the first season, I had sort of an epiphany, and it's very plausible Oda used this as an opportunity to experiment and incorporate ideas he didn't have till much later early on in this series. It's just a fact Oda did not plan everything in One Piece from the beginning, and what makes his adaptation so great is it takes these amazing things from the original and sort of builds on it, such as what if I had done this or told the story that way? It's One Piece, but with 20 plus years of planning, feedback, and notes, which is why it unsurprisingly worked. Despite how different the two are in comparison, the core factors from the source are very much alive in the adaptation because they figured out how to adapt One Piece. And if you had told me 5 years ago it would be this series that would break the anime to live action curse, I wouldn't believe you. But here we are, roughly a week after its release, and we have witnessed the impossible. Overall, if you haven't watched the live action yet, I highly recommend you do so, because whether or not you're a One Piece fan, it's just a great series to watch, and hopefully it gets approved for a second season. Didn't really plan an outro, so that's about it.